I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Essential tremor is considered benign, but it can profoundly affect quality of life. Could focused ultrasound help? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we speak with a neurosurgeon about a relatively new technology called focused ultrasound. How does it work? And what can it be used for?
We'll also hear from a patient who was severely impaired by early onset Parkinson's disease. His involuntary muscle spasms made it hard for him to function.
How did the use of this relatively new technology affect his life?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, using focused ultrasound against Parkinson's disease and tremor.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, you might have hoped that rates of influenza would be dropping by now. Unfortunately, though, the flu has not faded. About 4.6% of visits to healthcare providers this past week were for influenza-like illness. That's up just a smidge from 4.4% the previous week. Despite the disappointment, we shouldn't be surprised. This is the pattern flu has followed for both of the last 2 years, and it's also how flu behaved in Australia at the end of the 2025 flu season. Influenza A is starting to decrease while influenza B is ramping up. Among cases of influenza A, subclade K dominated. According to the CDC, this ranks as a moderate flu season for adults and seniors. It's been a severe flu season for kids. Other infectious diseases that are still widespread include COVID, human metapneumovirus, norovirus, and RSV. Measles has been spreading in South Carolina at an alarming rate. Surrounding states are also reporting cases. Dr. Mehmet Oz, director of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, urges unvaccinated people to take the vaccine, please.
Intermittent fasting has been promoted as a way to lose weight, boost insulin sensitivity, and improve glucose metabolism. This approach involves eating only during a set period every day, often 8 hours or less. Some other approaches have volunteers eat certain days of the week and fast on others. Proponents maintain that this can make weight control easier. However, not all studies have shown benefit. An analysis of 22 randomized clinical trials with nearly 2,000 participants found that intermittent fasting made little difference for weight loss. People who counted calories lost a similar amount of weight. The Cochrane collaboration concluded, quote, compared to regular dietary advice, intermittent fasting may result in little to no difference in weight loss or quality of life.
Over 40 million Americans take antidepressant medications. Millions more take anti-anxiety agents. For many people, these drugs are lifelines. However, a new meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine suggests that exercise-based interventions can help relieve symptoms of depression and anxiety almost as well or sometimes better than traditional psychotherapy or pharmacotherapy. When exercise was provided in a supervised group setting, it was especially helpful for easing depression. Anxiety was relieved by somewhat shorter, less intense workouts. The authors conclude that mental health professionals should prescribe exercise with the same confidence as traditional treatments, recognizing that all exercise formats demonstrate positive effects while tailoring programs to individual profiles and preferences.
A different kind of treatment is far more controversial. It involves an ultra-short-acting psychedelic called DMT, or dimethyltryptamine. This hallucinogen is found in several plants, including those that make up ayahuasca. Researchers administered an intravenous dose of DMT or placebo to 34 patients who had long-lasting depression. Those who received the 10-minute DMT infusion had greater relief from their depression than those on placebo infusion. The altered state of consciousness lasted roughly half an hour. The Bennetts, however, lasted months. The authors report that DMT was, quote, well tolerated with no serious adverse events. The authors call for longer and larger clinical trials to confirm these promising results.
For years, people have been playing games to train their brains. Scientists have just published the result of a study that included nearly 3,000 volunteers who were at least 65 years old and cognitively healthy at the outset of the study. Researchers assigned these participants to a control group or one of 3 computer training groups: speed, memory, or reasoning. Half the members of each training group also were assigned to get booster sessions after the regular training. 20 years later, people who did speed training with boosters are 25% less likely to have developed dementia. Training alone without the boosters made no difference. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The brain is the ultimate black box. It's hard to determine what's happening in the brain that can lead to all sorts of neurological challenges.
Operating on the brain is especially difficult. That's because it's such a complex organ. You have to be extremely careful not to damage critical brain structures while you're trying to fix a problem. A mistake could be devastating.
Movement disorders are notoriously hard to treat, whether they're something seemingly benign, such as an essential tremor that makes your hands shake, or a debilitating condition such as Parkinson's disease.
There are medications as well as deep brain stimulation, but there are limits to such interventions.
Today, we're going to learn about an innovative treatment that many people are unfamiliar with. We're talking with Dr. Neil Cassell. He's the founder and chairman of the Focused Ultrasound Foundation. Dr. Cassell was a professor of neurosurgery at the University of Virginia from 1984 until 2016, and the co-chairman of the department until 2006.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Neil Cassell.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with your audience again.
Well, we're so happy to have you back, and a lot has happened since we talked to you first, but before we get really involved in the latest and greatest, Dr. Neil Cassell, please tell us, how did you get interested in focused ultrasound?
It's a little bit of a long, convoluted story, but it goes back 22 years ago or so when I was casting about for a non-invasive or minimally invasive solution to a fairly large number of patients I had in my practice who had either had brain tumors where it had either maxed out on surgery and radiation and chemotherapy and had no alternative, or patients who had tumors which were in surgically inaccessible locations. And by accident, one day I was operating on a patient with a ruptured aneurysm, and the anesthesiologist told me they were measuring blood flow in the heart muscle using microbubbles and ultrasound, and should I try that in the brain, which we did, and it worked. And then one day I was driving home from the hospital. I can remember exactly the time of the day and the location, and I had one of those aha moments, and I said, I bet that we could use ultrasound plus or minus microbubbles as a solution for these otherwise untreatable patients. So then I went to the internet thinking that I had finally had, after all these years of research, a Nobel Prize winning idea, went to the internet and discovered that it is a Nobel Prize winning idea. It just wasn't mine. So that was the origin of my interest in focused ultrasound.
Well, perhaps, Dr. Cassell, you can tell us and our listeners, what is focused ultrasound?
Well, focused ultrasound is a revolutionary, game-changing totally non-invasive therapeutic technology that will ultimately improve the lives of millions of people around the world with a wide variety of serious medical disorders by serving as an alternative or a complement to traditional surgery and radiation therapy, an entirely new way of delivering drugs and other therapeutic agents more safely and effectively, and of enhancing cancer immunotherapy. So the way it works is it's analogous to using a magnifying glass to focus beams of light on a point and burn a hole in a leaf. But with focused ultrasound, instead of an optical lens focusing beams of light, an acoustic lens is used to focus multiple beams of ultrasound energy on targets deep in the body with a high degree of precision and accuracy, sparing the adjacent normal tissue. And at that focal point where the beams converge, we now understand more than 30 ways in which ultrasound can affect tissue. 10 years ago, we only understood about 5. So this is in contrast to radiation therapy, for instance, or a surgical robot, which only has one mechanism of action. Focused ultrasound has more than 30, which creates the opportunity to treat a wide variety of serious medical disorders. And more than a decade ago, there were only 3 medical disorders in various stages of research and development. Today, there are more than 180. And of those 180, about 35 have regulatory approval around the world, 10 in the US.
So let me get this straight. You're focusing sound waves, that's ultrasound. How many are being focused on a specific place in the brain?
Well, it's not only the brain, it's the entire body. And it varies between several hundred and 4,000 to 8,000. And where each of the individual beams goes through the tissue, it has no effect because it's just the same power as diagnostic ultrasound. But at that focal point where all the beams converge, where like the beams of light converge to burn a hole in a leaf, where all the beams of ultrasound converge, that's where all the action happens on the tissue.
Now, it seems like it took the Food and Drug Administration rather a long time to approve focused ultrasound. And what was the first approval for?
First approval in the U.S. was for uterine fibroids, and subsequently it's been approved for a number of other conditions,
Such as?
Essential tremor, Parkinson's disease, pain from bone metastasis, prostate cancer, benign prostatic hypertrophy, and so on. And around the world, about 35 approvals have been achieved.
And how long did it take the FDA to grant approval?
Several years. But the FDA is not an obstruction. The FDA provides helpful guardrails. It just takes a long time to develop the evidence, the rigorous scientific evidence that the technology is safe and effective.
Dr. Cassell, you have said that you have a technology that focuses the sound waves. And I'm wondering, is it too complicated to explain exactly how you focus sound waves?
Well, it uses an acoustic lens, like instead of an optical lens, which focuses beams of light, the acoustic lens focuses these multiple beams of ultrasound energy. And the point in the body where the beams are focused is selected. It's selected and guided and controlled by medical imaging, either ultrasound or MR, magnetic resonance imaging, so you know exactly where you're treating and how the treatment is progressing.
We were walking in the woods a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Cassell, and we were going up a fairly steep hill, and we ran into a couple, and they described the fact that the woman in the couple could never have done this 3 weeks before. She has very severe Parkinson's disease, and I think she got deep brain stimulation, and she said, it has been a miracle. I can now walk. I can now do things that I could not do before. One of the first applications of focused ultrasound has also been to treat Parkinson's disease. How well does it work? And tell us a little bit more about its specific outcomes.
So for Parkinson's disease, focused ultrasound is an alternative for certain patients, not for all patients, but for certain patients to deep brain stimulation, which is the gold standard. And the way it works is that the same target in the brain that is used for deep brain stimulation is the target where the ultrasound is focused. And it's those areas where there's abnormal nerve cells and circuits that are destroyed by the focused ultrasound. So again, it's not for all patients, but for those patients who are candidates, it's very effective. And that's why it is approved by the FDA, not only for Parkinson's tremor, but for the motor symptoms, the cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's disease as well.
Dr. Cassell, we always like to ask about side effects and complications. So can you tell us, please, very briefly, what sorts of side effects do people experience if the focused ultrasound has treated their Parkinson's disease?
Well, if it's off target, you can get weakness, numbness, difficulty vision, or difficulty speaking. Having said that, the safety profile of focused ultrasound compared to the alternative, deep brain stimulation, is as good, if not better.
And Dr. Cassell, how many places around this country is focused ultrasound available? We know that your center at Charlottesville, Virginia, University of Virginia, has been at the epicenter. How many other places can people go to for focused ultrasound in the 30 seconds we have before our break?
There's about 250 sites in the U.S. currently treating patients with focused ultrasound. And it depends whether it's brain indications, prostate indications, liver indications.
You're listening to Dr. Neil Cassell, founder and chairman of the Focused Ultrasound Foundation, a global nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating the clinical adoption of focused ultrasound therapies. Dr. Cassell is professor emeritus of neurosurgery at the University of Virginia.
After the break, we'll find out how focused ultrasound can be used to treat brain tumors.
It could also be used to treat essential tremor. What is that?
Might focused ultrasound also help Parkinson's disease symptoms?
How long does the treatment take?
Might focused ultrasound be used to activate the immune system and treat cancer?
Have doctors embraced focused ultrasound?
What about veterinarians?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Spatial Sleep, a non-drug approach to help you fall asleep and stay asleep without medications. More information at spatialsleep.com.
And by Sonu, an FDA-approved drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, using sound instead of steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com.
Today, we're talking about a relatively new technology called focused ultrasound. It's being used to treat some challenging health conditions, from cancer, including brain tumors, and essential tremor to uterine fibroids and Parkinson's disease.
What is essential tremor, and why is it so disruptive?
Essential tremor is a movement disorder that causes shaking, especially of your hands. This can make it hard to write or hold a cup of coffee or button your shirt. The medications doctors prescribe can help some people, but they don't work for everyone.
To learn more about focused ultrasound, we're talking with Dr. Neil Cassell. He's the founder and chairman of the Focused Ultrasound Foundation. Dr. Cassell was a professor of neurosurgery at the University of Virginia from 1984 till 2016 and co-chairman of the department until 2006.
Dr. Cassell, you described to us how excited you were to realize that focused ultrasound could be used to treat brain tumors. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Well, as I said, I was frustrated because I had this large number of patients and we had no treatment for them. And we finally came across something that had the potential to treat these patients with brain tumors. But it very rapidly became apparent that this technology could be used to treat many other disorders in the brain, as well as disorders throughout the body, all sorts of tumors and things like that.
Tell us a little bit about essential tremor, because there are a fair number of people who suffer from this condition. While it may not be as life-threatening as brain cancer, it can be very disruptive to quality of life.
Yeah, so essential tremor is very common. There's about 8 to 10 million people in the United States who have essential tremor. And of those 8 to 10 million, there's probably 1 million that are bad enough to be treated.
Can you describe what it's like?
It's people, their hands shake, and it may shake so badly. Like, for instance, a typical patient that we had some years ago was disabled by her essential tremor for 20 years. She couldn't button her shirt. She couldn't tie her shoes. She couldn't drink a cup of coffee or eat cereal or go to a restaurant. And she went into the focused ultrasound machine and was treated, and 2 hours later came out and she was cured. And today, around the world, about 25,000 patients with essential tremor have been cured, and soon it'll be in the hundreds of thousands.
So for essential tremor, a single treatment can be a cure?
Yes, it's one and done.
What about for Parkinson's disease?
For Parkinson's tremor, it's one and done, and the same for Parkinson's, the cardinal symptoms. Now, often these disorders affect both sides of the body, and if you're doing both sides, you separate the treatment on one side from the other by about 6 months because it's different targets.
Now, I think a lot of people want to know, will it last? In other words, if someone comes in, gets treated for essential tremor or Parkinson's disease, will this be maintained over months and years?
Well, all the evidence for essential tremor is that the durability is very strong. Remember, this is a progressive disease, so that sometimes the symptoms do come back. But all in all, the durability is very good. With Parkinson's disease, the durability is also very good, but Parkinson's disease is a much more rapidly progressing disorder than essential tremor.
What can you tell us about other cancers and how it might work to activate the immune system?
So it's being used. It's commercially available now for treating tumors of the liver, prostate cancer, and so on. And the way focused ultrasound affects cancer, it has several mechanisms. First of all, you can use the energy to destroy the tumor. Secondly, you can use the energy as a way to facilitate the delivery of drugs or the effectiveness of drugs. And third, and the area that we are very, very interested in and excited about, is enhancing the effectiveness of cancer immunotherapy drugs. So as we sit here, we have cancer cells circulating throughout our body, but our body's immune system recognizes those cancer cells as troublemakers and kills them. But occasionally, some of those cells get loose and aggregate and form tumors. And when they aggregate and form tumors, they have a way of camouflaging themselves from the body's immune system. So focused ultrasound has the potential to strip away that camouflage, allow the body's immune system to recognize these cancer cells as troublemakers, and enhance or augment the effectiveness of the cancer immunotherapy drugs. These miraculous cancer immunotherapy drugs like Keytruda, which cured Jimmy Carter of his metastatic melanoma to liver, lung, and brain, are effective in only 20 to 40% of the patients. Focused ultrasound has the potential to increase that response rate to 60 or 80 or 90%. There's a number of clinical trials that are ongoing, but it's still early stage.
Dr. Cassell, I think it's easy to imagine how focused ultrasound could destroy a tumor, for example, but you've also suggested that it might help with drug delivery. How does that work?
Well, there's a number of approaches. The simplest to understand is to use microbubbles. Microbubbles are hollow lipid spheres about 1/10 of a diameter of a red blood cell. And you can fill these microbubbles up with drugs, chemotherapy agents for cancer, other drugs for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or ALS. And then you inject millions and millions of these microbubbles into the bloodstream. And the microbubbles circulate throughout the body. They go to every tissue and every organ. Wherever the blood goes, the microbubbles with the drug inside of them travel to those tissues and organs. But the drug is inactive because it's trapped in the microbubble, except at the point where the ultrasound is focused. And at that point only, the microbubbles burst and release their pharmacological payload.
Thank you.
Dr. Cassell, I'm curious about cost and I'm curious about insurance because, as I am sure you are well aware, the costs of cancer treatment these days ranges from hundreds of thousands of dollars to, in some cases, millions of dollars with immunotherapy, CAR T, for example. How much does ultrasound cost, whether it's, for example, essential tremor or Parkinson's disease, or perhaps a tumor in the brain? And does insurance cover it? How hard is it for people to be able to get their insurance company to cover it?
So the cost of the focused ultrasound devices, the cost of the devices is the same order of magnitude as other high-end therapeutic devices, whether it's a linear accelerator for radiation therapy or a surgical robot. So, for example, a hysterectomy for uterine fibroids, which is the gold standard, all in doctor and patient, is about $20,000 to $25,000. A focused ultrasound treatment is $5,000 to $10,000. Deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease is $60,000 to $100,000 just for the first year. Focused ultrasound is about $30,000. So a number of these indications, as I mentioned, have FDA approval. More and more are getting reimbursed. Essential tremor, for instance, is fully reimbursed by Medicare and commercial insurance. There's more and more reimbursement for prostate cancer and so on. So it's just it takes a long time to get the regulatory approval because you have to have the evidence for the clinical trials. But then it takes a much longer, more difficult path to get insurance coverage, particularly from the commercial insurance companies.
But it does sound as though the insurance companies could potentially save some money if they approved ultrasound treatment in those situations where it's appropriate.
Yeah, of course they could. But the situation's a little more complicated because, for instance, uterine fibroids, only about 1/3 of the patients who should be treated are treated. because they don't want the hassle of surgery or uterine artery embolization. Along comes focused ultrasound, which is a non-invasive outpatient procedure. And that number will go from a third to 2/3 or 75%. So although the insurance companies are paying less per patient, when you add up the number of patients being treated, it actually can be adverse to more expensive to the insurance company, less expensive to the patient. But it's important to recognize that focused ultrasound is one of the rare technologies that fulfills the holy grail of not only improving outcome and decreasing the cost and improving the accessibility of care.
I'm curious about your colleagues, Dr. Cassell. How have physicians in general embraced focused ultrasound? It's still considered a somewhat newer technology compared to some of the older treatments, especially the folks in your field, neurosurgery. Have they embraced ultrasound, or is there still a little reluctance?
There's still a little reluctance. Remember, focused ultrasound is a highly disruptive technology. It disrupts referral patterns to physicians and practice patterns, how they're treated. As time goes on, this resistance is decreasing and decreasing fairly quickly.
So put that into plain English. In other words, some of your colleagues are not getting on the bandwagon very fast because it's a disruptive technology, disruptive in the sense that it changes the way in which they have practiced medicine in the past.
And they get reimbursed less for doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm actually interested in some healthcare professionals you might not think of as colleagues, and those are veterinarians. I read that focused ultrasound is now being used to treat companion animals. Can you tell us anything about that?
Absolutely. The foundation has a major veterinary program, and we consider companion animals as patients, just like humans. So this technology has been developed and tested in animal models of human disease. But it turns out that animals naturally develop the same type of diseases as humans. But whereas the technology has been used to treat human patients, it had heretofore not been used to treat companion animals. So we decided to start this program to treat the companion animals and study them with their natural disease instead of models. And then we create a virtuous cycle of animals helping humans, helping animals, helping humans. And then there's this whole notion of One Health, where studies in animals can more directly and in parallel be done in patients, the conditions, the way those clinical trials are done. So this is a very important area. We feel that the adoption of the technology, once we get a little further along, will be more rapid than in the human space, because the major barriers to adoption, regulatory, there are no regulatory barriers, and reimbursement, there are no reimbursement barriers.
Dr. Cassell, I'd like you to look into your crystal ball and tell us, what do you see for the future of focused ultrasound?
Well, several months ago, we passed the milestone of 1 million patients treated around the world for a variety of indications with focused ultrasound in about 1,500 commercial treatment sites. We forecast that in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully closer to 5 years, more than 1 million patients will be treated every year around the world in about 10,000 commercial treatment sites. And we're confident of that because we say that sooner or later, either you or a loved one or a friend, or perhaps most importantly, your dog or cat will develop a condition which could be treated with focused ultrasound.
And Dr. Cassell, where could people find out more about focused ultrasound and whether it's available in their communities?
They can go to the foundation's website by Googling Focused Ultrasound Foundation, and there's a fairly robust list of all the sites that are doing clinical trials and commercial treatments around the world.
Dr. Cassell, not every therapy is appropriate for every patient. Are there people who need to avoid focused ultrasound for one reason or another? And if there are, maybe you can tell us what those reasons are.
Well, a very simple reason would be for any of the brain treatments that require focused ultrasound provided in an MR scan. If they cannot have an MR scan, they're not candidates.
Okay.
Dr. Cassell, our ability to treat pain leaves a lot to be desired. We know about the problems of opioids, but some of the other drugs that we use are not that much better or effective. How does focused ultrasound help with pain?
Well, it's an interesting and timely question because we are sponsoring a webinar February 3rd. The foundation is sponsoring a webinar that's being led off by Sanjay Gupta, who's going to talk about his new book on pain. And then one of our team members will then talk about all of the different mechanisms by which focused ultrasound can be used to alleviate pain and all the different types of pain, from neuropathic pain to post-stroke pain to cancer pain. So it's a very timely and important topic.
Dr. Cassell, one of the most challenging conditions that we are facing as a country and in the world is dementia, and in particular, Alzheimer's disease. Are you doing any research with focused ultrasound when it comes to AD or dementia?
Yes, there's a fairly robust number of clinical trials ongoing for Alzheimer's disease. First is to facilitate the drug entering into the brain in higher concentrations than can be achieved with the normal oral or intravenous routes of administration. Secondly is using focused ultrasound to stimulate or block neural activity and treat patients with dementia. And the preliminary results are quite encouraging, but again, it's very, very early stage, but it's an area of intense research for us.
Dr. Cassell, as you look back on your career and your, shall we say, aha moment over 20 years ago, has ultrasound lived up to your expectations or exceeded them?
Where focused ultrasound today is so far exceeded anybody's imagination when we got started with this field. I mean, there's more than 180 clinical indications, 1 million patients treated. We had no idea of the depth and breadth of the effectiveness of this treatment.
Finally, Dr. Cassell, I would be interested in the 1 minute we have left, a case that just really amazed you in the way in which focused ultrasound made a difference.
Well, there was a very high profile, actually healthcare lawyer who had been disabled by essential tremor. He went to the University of Virginia here in Charlottesville. He was treated at 7:30 in the morning. The treatment took about an hour. He got off of the table, went out to breakfast with his wife, and came over to the foundation to thank the team for this miraculous cure.
That sounds very impressive indeed. If he was aware so early on that it was a wonderful cure. And we would like to thank you very much, Dr. Neil Cassell, for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to expose your audience to this amazing technology.
You've been listening to Dr. Neil Cassell, founder and chairman of the Focused Ultrasound Foundation. Dr. Cassell is Professor Emeritus of Neurosurgery at the University of Virginia, where he served as co-chair of the department until 2006.
And Terry, we talked to Dr. Cassell many, many years ago in the very beginning of Focused Ultrasound. It's so great to see how much they've accomplished. Well, after the break, you'll hear from a patient about his experience with Focused Ultrasound.
He found that the drugs he was taking for his dystonia were almost worse than the disease itself. He'll tell us how he learned about Focused Ultrasound and decided to consider the treatment.
Focused ultrasound has to be guided by MRI. How could a person with a movement disorder stay still enough in the MRI?
Find out how the procedure felt, how long it took, and how it changed his life.
How have other patients responded? How many of them benefit? And what outcomes do they experience?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Spatial Sleep, a non-drug approach to help you fall asleep and stay asleep without medications. More information at spatialsleep.com.
And by Sonu, an FDA-approved, drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, using sound instead of steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's GetSonu.com.
Today we're exploring how an innovative technology is being used to treat some challenging health conditions. You've almost certainly heard of ultrasound used for imaging, but were you familiar with the use of focused ultrasound to destroy tissue very selectively?
Every treatment has benefits and risks. Focused ultrasound requires an experienced team to target the sound waves precisely. Some people have tried to make this technology understandable by using the metaphor of focusing sunlight through a magnifying glass. But instead of one beam of light, it uses many beams of ultrasound. That may sound simple, but the technology is complex and the procedures are demanding.
We have just heard from neurosurgeon Neil Cassell, founder and director of the Focused Ultrasound Foundation. He offered the healthcare provider's point of view.
For a patient's perspective, we turn now to Bobby Krause. He's the founder of the Be Still Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering patients and families affected by essential tremor and Parkinson's disease.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Bobby Krause.
Thank you very much, Joe and Terry, for the invite, and excited to share my story today with your audience.
Well, Bobby, why don't you start by telling us when you first realized that something wasn't quite right?
Yeah, it was a pretty defining moment. So at the age of 42 in 2016, I started noticing what I thought was a nerve impingement at the time, just a little bit of a shaking in the left arm. Nothing to be concerned about. I mean, again, I'm early 40s at that point, and certainly the last thing that I thought on my mind was going to be that it was young onset Parkinson's. But what started as just a slight tremor in the arm, then over a couple of years became some dystonia in the feet and the legs, and then the tremor became a little more violent.
Now, Bobby, dystonia, what is that?
Dystonia is a kind of a tightness and a cramping that occurs as one of the symptoms of Parkinson's.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So initially, again, I think the emotional challenges may have been worse than the physical challenges. So I coached my sons in basketball, and as I told them a story the other week, they always wondered why I wore a hooded sweatshirt when I was coaching, because I was always sweating, and they were wondering why have all those extra layers. Well, the hood provided me a little pouch in the front that I could slide my arm in because I was embarrassed of my sons and the other players and the players' parents seeing me have the tremors and the kind of the violent shake. So that was really for me the catalyst in the beginning of it all. Again, at the age of 42, being diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's isn't something that was really in the plans, obviously, but something we needed to deal with, and we started out initially dealing with it in the form of medication,
Uh-huh.
which really actually became worse than the disease itself.
How so?
So most people in the Parkinson's world, most 50 to 75% of the people don't respond to medication. In fact, most have adverse reactions, whether it's night terrors, cramping, dyskinesias, bradykinesia. There's a variety of things that occur and happen from the medication. So that was one for me where I battled a severe depression. I had the night terrors. I had the cramping, and it got to the point where, and it's sad to tell this story, but on my son's 14th birthday, we had a big party at the house, and I came around the corner, Joe and Terry, and I saw my son apologizing to his friends because of the way Dad was acting, explaining that Dad had Parkinson's, and Dad was on a lot of medication. So, as a father of two young boys and a husband to my wife, it was a really tough day for me to deal with the fact that my sons recognized I had a physical limitation that was also manifesting in my attitude and the way that I was raising my son. So
That
so
does
for
sound difficult, yes.
so for me at that time, I literally went in the house, got all my medications together, and called my movement disorder specialist, and we came up with a new plan that would allow me to reduce my medication, but also deal with what was for me the most dominant symptom that I had with my young onset Parkinson's, which was the tremors on the left side of my body.
So, Bobby, when did you first get a glimpse that there might be another way to treat this condition? Because I can imagine that both the psychological as well as that physical tremor that was really disrupting your life had almost become unbearable.
Yeah, and you're right, and that's something that most people don't talk about. Is that obviously there's a physical manifestation of the symptoms when people either have predominant tremor, Parkinson's, or essential tremor. And you can see that. You can visually see it, and it creates a lot of challenges for many. For me at the age of 42, having to ask my wife to button my shirt, to brush my teeth, to help me put toothpaste on my toothbrush. I mean, those are things that, as a young husband and father, we're just embarrassed to ask, embarrassed to do. So was a strong emotional toll on that. But fortunately, in 2016, there's a company called Insight Tech that was doing a clinical trial for focused ultrasound, MR guided. And I was fortunate enough to learn about it. Now, I wasn't fortunate enough to be a part of the clinical trials, but it gave me hope that there was something that was down the road that could help remedy my symptoms for tremor. So I closely watched as the trials were going through its FDA approval process. And then obviously coming into 2020, we all know with COVID kind of slowed some things down. But it was really at the back end of 2021 was I was made aware that I was actually in line and was due up at University of Pennsylvania to have the procedure performed that would ultimately change my life and my family's life.
Tell us about that, please.
Certainly. So again, I'm not really good with dates, but this is a date I'll always remember, of June 9th of 2022, because how transformative the day was for me physically, emotionally, and for my family and my community. But it's one where it's an in and out procedure. So what started for me at 8 o'clock in the morning ended up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon was a day that again transformed my life from the standpoint of when I went in that morning, I had the dystonia, as I mentioned earlier, Terry, where my toes actually curled underneath my feet. So when I walked on my feet, it was almost, I had bruising on the top of my feet.
Oh, my.
I had a rigidity and a stiffness where the muscles were so tightened and compressed that I was actually almost an inch shorter than I normally was. Now, granted, I didn't grow an inch that day, but when I came home that night, I was back to my normal 6'6" height because of the muscles that just released. And then lastly, I just had a lot of muscle rigidity, which again is a fairly common symptom found in those with Parkinson's.
Well, you're suggesting that your response was almost instantaneous. What did the treatment feel like? What was that
Yeah,
experience like?
it was really unlike anything I've ever experienced. So as I went into the tube, and again, you're correct, Terry. You're awake 100% of the time, because what they want to do is, as they identify that part of the thalamus that they're treating, they want to make sure that they're serving the right area. So they'll take you into the MRI tube. You'll feel a warming. For me, I felt a warming sensation of the brain. You have a halo on that's circulating cold water, and as the ultrasound waves are doing what it needs to do on the ablation, I felt a warming sensation, a little bit of discomfort, but nothing outrageous. And then on the first, they call them sonications, where they actually induce the focused ultrasound waves to that determined area. On the first time, I looked down at my feet and I actually saw my toes pop open for the first time in years. And at that point, it was one of those ones where you knew something special was going to happen that day. If just on that very first round of treatment, I saw that difference in the dystonia in my feet. They pull you out of the machine. They do some testing just to make sure, some finger taps, just to make sure everything that is working appropriately. Put you back in, raise the heat up a little bit, again, as they continue that ablation. And on the second sonication that I was in there, Joe and Terry, if you think of the circularity of an MRI tube, I actually felt my body at the end of the sonication just completely conform to that circularity, as my muscles had just finally relaxed after probably 6 years of just extreme muscle tightness that required a lot of massage treatments, a lot of therapy. My muscle just had let go. And as I mentioned earlier, we even saw that in the difference in my height from the morning being at 6'5", and by the time I left at the end of the day being back to my 6'6" normal height. And then on the third sonication, that was the one that was the difference maker. You have your arms crossed while you're in the tube, and I'm shaking violently. For Parkinson's patients, most of our tremors are when we're at rest and when we're laying flat. So my tremors were at their absolute, and when you're stressed and when you're cold. So if you think about an MRI suite and you think about having, brain surgery, there's a lot of stress going on in that moment. So my arm was just flailing, and they counted down. They ran the sonication for that 15 to 25 seconds, and I looked down, and my arm was completely still, and
Wow.
I just sobbed uncontrollably, knowing that my life had been changed in that moment.
And now, Bobby, what occurs to me is when you're in an MRI, you're supposed to be totally still. Do they and if they're doing, if they're doing surgery, even if it's surgery with ultrasound on your brain, they want your head to be completely still. Do they strap it in?
Correct. So yeah, you're right, and that was one of the jokes of the day. Was every once in a while the doctor would kind of speak into the microphone, "Hey, do you mind holding still?" And then we obviously just had a little chuckle, knowing that that's the reason why I was there. But yeah, there's a couple things that happen. So it's a little more sophisticated and advanced than a traditional MRI table. So there is that normal lock-in procedure where it goes over the face and locks in. But then, because of the importance of maintaining that stillness of the from the neck up, they have an extra kind of a cradle that affixes to the head during the procedure and helps lock in even further. So there's no movement from the neck up.
So, Bobby, once the procedure was done, once you were on the way home, how did you react to this, what we'll call almost amazing and instantaneous change in your life?
Yeah, it was one for me. I went down with my wife that day. She was with me, and knowing that when I got home, there was going to be a little bit of a celebration of the procedure. So my two sons were there. My mom was there. Some in-laws were there. And when we pulled into the driveway, the first thing I did was I jumped out of the car and did some jumping jacks, did some running around. And when I came up, I just saw both my sons in particular just had tears of joy running down their faces, knowing that their dad had returned back to his former self. Looked over at my mom. My mom was crying uncontrollably. And again, I think everybody just recognized that there was such a change in my emotional and social life. Like I said, we're humans. We're pretty adaptive. So on the physical side of things, we have weighted spoons and forks. There's things and tricks that we can work around the tremors at times. But the emotional side and the social side, you become the introvert, and I was the ultimate extrovert. So for almost a 6-year window, the depression just took such a toll on me. I was in bed by 6:30 at night. I always tell people I was put on this earth to be a father and a husband, and I was absentee for a period of time. So being able to pull into the driveway, see my family, and to show them what I was able to do, I immediately signed up to start coaching my son's basketball again. One of my favorite things to do in life. We as a family knew that at that day that my life had truly changed.
Bobby, how are you now? Has the treatment held up or have you needed repeat treatments?
No, so that's the great part. I'm almost 4 years in, and again, this is my current status. So I would say that I'm 99% still tremor free 4 years later. No other side effects. There's kind of a known side effects post procedure that lasts between 2 and 3 weeks, sometimes up to 4 weeks, where it's kind of some imbalance and gait issues, some spatial recognition. But with physical therapy and just the healing of the brain, they all go away in time.
Just to put this into perspective, Bobby, how many people benefit the way you have with Parkinson's disease or essential tremor when they undergo focused ultrasound? I mean, is this a 50%, 75%? I mean, roughly, what are the outcomes?
Yeah, so actually, I was at an event where I was asked to speak a couple of weeks ago, so I got some of the numbers that are pretty fresh. But they've just finished and completed their 30,000th procedure globally, which was exciting to see, and it's at a really high trajectory where it's growing in 2026 and beyond. But what they're typically seeing is a 75% or more improvement in the reduction or elimination of tremors after a 5-year period of time on the follow-up studies and trials.
Bobby, we have just a minute left. I wonder if you can tell us how you are advocating now for people with Parkinson's disease.
No, thank you. Yeah. So this was such a transformative point in my life that I actually left the corporate world and started what is known now as the Be Still Foundation. We're here to provide the financial support, education, awareness for people like myself who don't have the insurance coverage, don't have the travel accommodation expenses, and just aren't aware of it. We know that only 3% of the people who would be qualified for this procedure know about the procedure. So there's 97% of the almost 12 million people afflicted with Parkinson's and essential tremor that know nothing about this procedure. So it's a huge awareness campaign, and excited to be able to share this story here with your audience as well, just to expand that awareness and education levels.
We so appreciate it. Bobby Krause, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you very much for your time.
You've been listening to Bobby Krause, a patient advocate and founder of the Be Still Foundation. That's a nonprofit dedicated to empowering patients and families affected by essential tremor or Parkinson's disease. We spoke earlier with Dr. Neil Cassell, Professor Emeritus of Neurosurgery at the University of Virginia. He is founder and director of the Focused Ultrasound Foundation.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
Today's show is number 1462. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. That's where you can share your comments about this episode. You can also reach us through email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
Our interviews are available through your favorite podcast provider. You'll find the podcast on our website on Monday morning. The podcast this week has some additional information on focused ultrasound. Are there people who should avoid it? How can focused ultrasound help with pain? Is there research on using focused ultrasound to treat Alzheimer's disease? Dr. Cassell will tell us if ultrasound has lived up to his expectations.
At peoplespharmacy.com, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about important health stories. When you subscribe, you also have regular access to information about our weekly podcast. We would be so grateful if you would write a review of the People's Pharmacy and post it to the podcast platform you prefer. If you find our topics interesting, please share them with friends and family. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.